You're listening to Wildlife Control Consultant, where we provide research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest management. Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing another episode of the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast, where we cover all things related to technical issues related to vertebrate pest control. That's right, all animals that have a spine, backbone, we're interested in talking about and how to resolve conflicts with them. All right, well, hey, glad to have you on board. Again, my schedule has been pretty hectic, getting kind of near the end of it, at least in the short term. Got one more week of traveling, had to do some traveling this weekend as well. But I'm back, so I thought I would get this podcast out because I don't have anything left in the kitty for next Friday. And so by the time you hear this, will be next Friday, and this is going to be next week's podcast for you. So, hey, glad to have you on board. If you're looking for questions, comments, thoughts, you can certainly reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Notice I don't have my website listed today, although I certainly could bring it up here. And there it is, the Wildlife Control Consultant website, where we have resources available for you. And of course, you can reach out to me if you're looking for some consulting, perhaps some ghostwriting, things along that, or perhaps some books and some training. You can certainly think about that. But I wanted today to talk about rabbits. That's right, rabbits, they can be the bane of a lot of people's existence. And I wanted to refer you to a resource that has excellent information on the management of rabbits that would be suitable for many states. Of course, always check your particular state laws before you get involved in anything. But I wanted to tell you how to get a hold of it. You basically go to the Montana Department of Ag website, and that URL is agr.mt.gov/vertebrate-pests, and vertebrate and pests are capitalized. I'll try to put that into the notes as well. But you're going to get to the Montana Department of Ag website. Another way of trying to get to it is just go into this search column right here and type in the word rabbit, and our document should come up. Notice it says our vertebrate pest bulletins here, and if we click that, that brings you to the bulletins page. A lot of information here that's available. You can download it at no additional cost. I hate calling it free because the citizens of Montana who have licenses have paid for this. It just doesn't require anyone to pay for it again, because nothing the government does is free, right? And so anytime a politician tells you something is free, you know they're lying to you, right? So I hate when we call it free. I prefer to call it you don't have to pay for it again. And of course, if you're not a resident of Montana, and I guess in that sense it's free because you didn't have to pay the cost, but it's been a gift on the basis of the Montanan citizens. So if you scroll into this particular site, let me try to blow up this page a little bit. And what you're going to do is you're just going to come down and see the heading here, rabbits. It's going to be in the first column because we have different things are organized, and these bulletins are created by someone who specializes in vertebrate pest control. And you basically come down here and it says managing damage by Montana's rabbits. And so we're going to click that, and it's a PDF file. So a lot of you should have Adobe Acrobat. And so it's basically going to be written from a Montanan perspective, obviously, because the person responsible for writing this is from Montana. And you can basically glean information that's going to be helpful for you. And so it basically starts from, I got to get this screen out of the way. It's driving me nuts. But in any event, I hate all this AI stuff that keeps popping up. And so there we go. We're going to hide it. And so let me try to reduce the size of this a little bit. So it starts off basically with the biology of Montana's rabbits, right? So Montana has, what does it say here? 8 different species of rabbits. of which case we have black-tailed jackrabbit, white-tailed jackrabbit, snowshoe hare, eastern cottontail, which is the widest distributed rabbit in the United States. Many of you that have problems with rabbits, you're going to be dealing with the eastern cottontail. It's got a really large range, almost half the country. And then, of course, the desert cottontail, the mountain cottontail, the pygmy rabbit, and then the European cottontail, right? So there's certainly a lot of rabbits here in the state of Montana. But here's the bottom line. The management of rabbits for damaging on your particular property, particularly if you're a homeowner, if you have a garden, the principles are basically all the same. It doesn't really matter what species you have, except when you're distinguishing between jackrabbits and the cottontails. Jackrabbits, you need to build the fence a little bit taller, but typically very few people are really having problems with jackrabbits. Their numbers have really plummeted over the last couple of decades. So, but it's possible you could be having trouble with jackrabbits. You just need to build a taller fence, right? Because jackrabbits can jump a little bit higher. So it talks about the biology very briefly of those particular species. And then it talks about identification of the damage of rabbits. And basically it talks about them consuming vegetation, gives you some signs of what to look for, how to differentiate between rabbit damage and deer damage. That is an important consideration, because the first step in integrated pest management is proper identification of what the pest is. So it really doesn't help anyone if you're treating for one pest and that's not the pest causing the problem. So you want to make sure you spend some time on the damage identification to make sure you're identifying the damage properly, keeping in mind that you can have damage from more than one species, right? So you could have rabbit damage and deer damage all at the same time, right? There's no rule that says your property can't have damage from either one. But nevertheless, it talks about the type of work that they do, right? The type of damage like consuming vegetation. That's obviously a big one, right? The next thing, of course, is they disrupt aesthetics. And that is sometimes the damage the rabbit does is it just disturbs how your property looks. And so that does bother some people. You know, someone like myself, I'm not someone who's like that particular about my property. I like rabbits, so I really kind of encourage them to be around. But, you know, they can snip a little bit of vegetation, but it's not a big deal for me, right? For someone who is like a plant person who wants a particular or a meticulous look on their property, rabbits can really be a pain, right? And some of the techniques to control rabbit damage also interferes with how the property looks, and that can be a problem for some people. Nevertheless, that's another type of damage that rabbits can do, where it just disrupts how the place looks. The article, or the publication, I guess could say, talks about some of the legal issues. Again, the legal information is written from a Montana state law perspective, right? So you always need to make sure, this is one weakness of this document, and that is just because Montana law says you can kill rabbits doesn't mean that's the case for your state, right? So you need to make sure you understand what the rules are before you do any lethal control on rabbits in your particular place. So make sure you find out what the law is. And so in Montana, rabbits are considered what's called a non-game animal, meaning they're not regulated. They can be taken by any means without limit in the state of Montana because they are, in that sense, unprotected. They're non-game. So if they were a game animal, there would be a season on the species, right? Or if it was protected, there would be some sort of rule saying it's a protected species, maybe because it had declining numbers to a place where they were concerned about it becoming extinct in the state. So nevertheless, there's hunting, of course. You can also do trapping of rabbits and, of course, pesticides. if you're going to be applying pesticides, that includes repellents. Remember, the EPA considers repellents a pesticide. So if you're applying those on someone else's property, you need to make sure you have the appropriate pesticide application license for the state that you're working in. Very few states allow you to use repellents on someone else's ground without a pesticide license. I think, if memory serves, Nebraska is one exception. But generally speaking, every state requires you to have a pesticide license when you're applying pesticides, which includes repellents, on someone else's property. Now, if you're using pesticides on your own property, like something like a repellent, typically you don't have to have a license for that, because repellents are considered, generally speaking, a general use product. They're generally not considered restricted use. When you're applying restricted use products, they always require a pesticide license to purchase and to apply, unless you're working under the license of someone who is licensed to apply pesticides. Now, I know it sounds a little complicated, but just kind of remember, if it's a restricted product, you cannot apply it and use it unless someone in authority over you or you have the license to have a pesticide license that's appropriate for that particular product. So my presentation here isn't trying to do a deep dive on the legalities, right? So I'm just simply telling you, make sure before you do any lethal control on rabbits, before you do any pesticidal control of rabbits, and that includes repellents, make sure you abide by your state wildlife laws and your state's pesticide laws. So wildlife laws are typically governed by your Division of Fisheries and Wildlife or your wildlife agency. Pesticidal laws are typically handled by your Department of Agriculture. So make sure you contact the appropriate agents to make sure you're following the proper regulations. All right, I know I've really done that. I just want to make sure no one's coming back to me and saying, I didn't know. I want to make sure you know that you need to make sure you obey the law. So, because this publication is written from a Montana legal perspective, right? And that's going to be different from your state if you're not living in the state of Montana. Okay, now let's get into some of the other control methods. Now, many of these control methods can be used by you in any state in the United States without any license requirements, right? Not all of them. If you're applying lethal control or a pesticide, those require, that's where you got to check the law. But when it comes to habitat modification is basically when you change the environmental conditions of the area to make it less attractive to rabbits. So one of the things when I talk to people and I say, if you build it, they will come. If you remove it, they will go, right? So all animals, all pests have to rely on the environment to survive. So why is the pest there in your particular property? It's there because the environment allows it to be there. Change the environment and the pest can't be there. It's really that simple. But the difference, of course, with rabbits is they're mobile, so they'll sometimes just pass through your yard. But you can make them want to not stay in your yard simply by making some changes to the environmental conditions on your property. And this publication will talk about some of those changes that you can implement. And even if it's not going to be perfect, understand that just sometimes subtle changes can have a big effect, because what the habitat modification does is it leverages some of the other methods. When we're talking about integrated pest management, you need to understand that it's sometimes when two tools are used, when two methods of control are used, they're not always additive. Sometimes they're multiplicative. That is, they multiply the effectiveness of each other rather than just simply being additive. Okay, and so that's where you're leveraging one tool by using another tool. Okay, and that's what habitat modification. So don't ignore the suggestions on habitat modification. Make sure you're reading that. The next thing you want to do is talk about exclusion. One of the simplest things to stop rabbit damage on your property is simply build a fence. A lot of people, unfortunately, think that fences are ugly, they don't want to use them, whatever, but sometimes it really is the easiest, simplest solution. Particularly if you have a garden, I really would encourage you to use a fence. The fence doesn't have to be very expensive. Chicken wire is more than enough to keep rabbits out of your garden. And it's cheap, right? It doesn't take very much, and so it's a very powerful way, a chemical-free way of managing, because you don't want any pesticides in your food supply. And so if you have a flower garden, I could understand why a fence may interfere with the look of your flower garden. I get that. But when we're dealing with food gardens, where you're trying to grow a crop to eat, you really don't want to be using repellents, even if the repellent is allowed for vegetable crops. Most of them are not, right? Because you don't want to have a mouthful of capsaicin, for example, right? That'd be really bad. And so a fence really is the way to go. The publication talks about the type of fencing. If you have rabbits going underneath sheds, going underneath decks, this picture here talks about how you can put a fence underneath those areas, because that's part of habitat modification. And that is, you're making the area less friendly to rabbit occupation, right? So you're putting in these fences to prevent rabbits from getting cover underneath sheds, and that makes them more vulnerable to predators. It makes them feel more insecure. So don't ignore that. Now, one of the things that we talk about, and that is repellents or frightening devices. Let me get to frightening devices next. Here's the bottom line on frightening devices. They're not really going to work, right? And if they do work, they're only going to work for a short period of time. Not really a whole lot to recommend there. So could you find something that sort of scares the rabbit away for a few days? Yeah, but I really don't think you should spend a whole lot of money on it, right? That's in this article certainly says that as well, right? There's no evidence that suggests that any of the frightening devices have any sort of long-term effect. Now, could there be one down the road? It's possible. I think it's highly unlikely, but who knows? There might be one. So frightening devices are different than repellents because they are non-chemical. So typically they use a visual, an auditory, or an audio visual, or they use some sort of a biological type frightening device, right? So they're non-chemical. Now, repellents, of course, we've already talked about that briefly. There are various repellents that are registered for repelling rabbits. But again, if you're using them on someone else's property, you need to make sure you have the appropriate licenses, unless your state doesn't require them. If you're using them on your own property, make sure you're always following that label. And you really can't use many of these products on food items for obvious reasons, right? You don't want to be eating this stuff. You say, well, it's just a repellent. It must be safe. No pesticide can be called safe, right? So I'm not saying these things aren't nuclear, right? There's certainly a lot more dangerous things out in the world, absolutely, but we just can't call them safe. And you don't want to be eating these repellents, right? So most of these repellents are just for ornamental type plants, where you're not going to be consuming the plant. You just want to stop the rabbit from consuming them. And it talks about some of those options for you. There are no toxicants. These are poisons. There are no poisons registered in the United States for the management of rabbits, right? The only chemicals allowed for the management of rabbits are repellents, and those are non-lethal products. So if you're looking to get a poison to control rabbits, I'm sorry, if you find one, it's illegal, right? Because hasn't been registered by the EPA, and it's really expensive to get them registered with the EPA. So There are none, right? So make sure you're aware of that. And I'm recording this in 2026, so there is nothing at this particular time. Now, some people like to think about shooting. The article does talk about shooting. Just keep in mind that you're not going to be shooting inside, areas like urban areas, usually incorporated areas. There's a lot of restrictions on the use of firearms, and that includes pellet rifles. A lot of things are considered firearms even when they don't have gunpowder in them, right? So keep that in mind. A lot of your local laws, your local regulations for your cities and towns are written in such a way that makes anything that shoots a projectile as a firearm. So make sure you're following the rules regarding that. And of course, we haven't even mentioned safety at this particular point. Now, there are trapping issues. There are ways to trap rabbits. The research seems to suggest that trapping of jackrabbits just simply isn't worth the time. So we're really talking about trapping your cottontails. And so the article, or this publication, talks about different methods to trap rabbits. And typically that's going to involve some sort of a cage trap or a box trap. And they're misnomered as live traps. I hate using the term live trap because footholds are live traps. And so it reinforces the public mythology that footholds kill and footholds don't kill. So I call them cage and box traps. So people say, footholds are footholds, live traps are live traps. And the answer is no. Live trap is an umbrella term that includes cage and box traps and restraining devices such as footholds. But that kind of goes into a little bit of a rabbit hole that I don't want to go down at this particular time. So when we talk about trapping rabbits, it talks about, are you dealing with a rabbit that's living on your property or a rabbit that is just visiting your property, and strategies on how you're going to deal with that. Lastly, it deals with the issue of biological control, and that is, are there predators that you can encourage in an area to help keep your rabbit population down? The answer is yes, but will it work to the level that you like? Probably not, right? It's just something that you could try, but don't think it's going to eliminate all of your particular rabbits per se. There's a short section on diseases. Understand that rabbits can carry diseases, both diseases that affect them and diseases that can be transmitted to you. So, not trying to create paranoia here, but just understand that you need to be safe around rabbits, and you need to have a little bit of an understanding of what you're dealing with. And so just keep in mind, animals are dirty. There are things that they carry that can affect you. Make sure you're careful, right? And so the article discusses some of them. Now, what happens when you capture a rabbit? What are you going to do with it? Well, it talks about releasing, right? Now, when we talk about releasing, it is illegal in the state of Montana to translocate an animal. So you can only release it on site, or you have to kill it, right? Other states have different rules. Some states will allow you to translocate and dump that rabbit somewhere else. This article will talk about what some of the downsides of translocation of an animal, right? So one of the things is you have to think about, is that animal sick? And you may not know that it's sick, right? It may look fine, but it may be carrying disease. And now all of a sudden you move that rabbit to a new area, and now you've transported that disease to another area. Or the animal may be healthy, and now you've moved it to an area where there is a disease, and now it gets infected. But actually, more to the point is recognizing that an area that is good for rabbits already has rabbits. So this notion that we're putting the rabbit in a place where there aren't rabbits is this sort of American mythology that there's this empty mountain that says, bring us your rabbits. It's simply not true. And when you move an animal, you're really putting it through an incredible amount of stress. It has to find shelter, food, while avoiding predators, and it's trying to reorient itself in a new area. all in a very short period of time. Let's say you released it in the afternoon. Now it may only have 4 or 5 hours before nightfall to orient itself. And it has to avoid predators, and it may get into fights with other rabbits who don't want it around. It often makes people feel warm and fuzzy inside, but it can be hell for the animal that you're transporting. So it's something to definitely think about. So what are you going to do? That means you're thinking about dispatch. What are the different ways you can dispatch? Again, consult your state's laws. Whatever method of dispatch, that is just sort of however you're going to kill it, whatever method you're going to use, make sure you're doing it out of public view. And you're thinking about how you're treating the animal. You want the death to be as quick and as responsible as possible. So there's 2 different options. You have what's called humane dispatch, where the animal is killed quickly, but it's going to suffer a little bit. It's going to experience some pain. And then the other method is called euthanasia, where the animal dies without feeling any pain. This article talks about the 2 methods that are going to be convenient for most people that you may want to consider. And then lastly, you got to think about the carcass disposal, right? What are you going to do with the carcass? So you want to be sure that you're going to do something responsible with that carcass so that it's not going to be, dragged up by someone's dog, found by a child, and things of that nature. And the article talks about proper carcass disposal as well. The principles of carcass disposal will be practical for many parts of the country. Of course, those of you in urban areas are going to have some other concerns. Some of the suggestions may not be suitable for you because there's just too many houses around. Montana, we do have some urban areas, but nothing like, let's say, New York or Massachusetts or California. Something to think about. Nevertheless, there is information on this particular publication. It is not going to cost you anything extra. I don't call it free because, again, things from the government are not free. That's been paid for by someone else. But this publications page is something that can be very helpful for you. And you're going to be able to rely on the information because it's been vetted by the Department of Agriculture. And so it may be something for you to look at. And so that way, you're like, where do I search? Google is a powerful tool, but sometimes it can lead you astray if you're not getting quality resources. So if you have rabbit problems, this is a place where you'd want to go. And again, go to Montana Department of Ag, go into the search bar up here at the top, okay, right here. Just put in the word rabbit and you click it and boom, there you go. Go to the Vertebrate Pest Bulletins page and you're good to go. Well, I hope you found that helpful for yourself. If you're having trouble with rabbits and you're looking for some information that is both accurate, succinct, and really gets you to the bottom line of what you need to have, what information you need to have to get yourself started in managing problems with rabbits, there's a publication for you that you can rely on. All right, well, I hope you found that helpful. I'm Stephen Van Tassel. I'm the host of the Wildlife Control Consultant broadcast. Perhaps you have resources that you like when dealing with rabbits. Definitely you could email those links to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. If you have questions, comments, yes, even criticisms, you can reach me there again. And lastly, if you're interested in being on the show, perhaps there is a product or a service or a company that you think would be good for other people in the wildlife control field to know about, I would love to hear about them, because we love having guests on our show. We think there's a lot of information out there, and we'd love to participate in helping getting that quality information out, because the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast is all about providing technical, research-based information on all things related to wildlife damage management. All right, well, that's it for me for this week. Hope you're all doing well. Be safe out there in this busy season. Until next time, take care. This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant podcast. Vertebrate pest control is an inherently dangerous activity involving risk of bodily injury to you, others, and/or property. Vertebrate pest control also involves legal issues, so be sure to always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and/or other control methods when controlling pests. Wildlife Control Consultant LLC, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their affiliates are not responsible for your use of the information provided here. Always consult a qualified and appropriate professional before employing the information provided here.